Hi, I'm Julie Perrin. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about my research. To begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia. I pay my respects to the elders past and present, their families and communities, the first Australians whose lands, winds and waters I now share. I'm coming to you from Bundjalung country in the northern rivers of New South Wales. I want to acknowledge and hope to honour today, through adequate representation, the people who so generously contributed to my research on such a painful experience. Today, I hope to cover some basic information about my study, talk about the significance of sibling relationships, look at the consequences of stigma and drug-related death, and look at family protectiveness as a response to stigma. To begin, my research was on sibling bereavement when the brother or sister dies for a drug-related reason. There's many reasons why I chose this topic. I've worked continuously in the alcohol and drug sector since 1985 in a range of roles and settings. During this time, I've often worked with families, usually parents, often in quite tragic and dire circumstances. Over the last 15 to 20 years, I've also specialised in couple and family work and thanatology, specifically bereavement. Through various courses of study, I became aware sibling bereavement was overlooked, as was the sibling relationship in the drug and alcohol sector. Due to the gaps in the literature, I decided to interview people where it was more than 5 years since the death of their sibling. This is because most people are interviewed within 2 years of the death. The research question often shape the type of methodology to be used. Mine is a qualitative study. I'm trying to understand experiences, which makes it a phenomenological study. And when you're trying to understand or interpret, and these terms are used interchangeably, it makes a hermeneutic study. Hence, it's a hermeneutic phenomenological study informed by the philosopher Gadamer. I chose Gadamer's philosophy intentionally because he makes room for recalling past experiences and reinterpreting them as time passes. Gadamer contends it is possible to have multiple understandings of one event because people are different, and therefore they'll have different interpretations. Or the same person's view changes over time as they gain additional life experiences and knowledge. I conducted semi-structured interviews with 21 people. 60 to 90 minutes was the duration of the interviews, with most being longer, and all were recorded and transcribed. Follow-up interviews were held within 48 hours. These were also recorded and transcribed and ranged between 10 to 45 minutes. More men contributed to the study and more brothers and sisters died. The average range of people participating, the range of age was 29 to 62 and the average age was 47. The siblings ranged in age from 20 to 40 years old, with an average age of 33 years. Time since death was 7 to 37 years. The average was 17 years, and notably some had never spoken to anyone about their sibling's death, which is astounding really, given the magnitude of the experience. The people in my study described their siblings' death as drug-related, and I've put some of the examples up on the screen. When it came to analysing the interviews, it became apparent to me that some people focus more on the sibling relationship, others on the drug and alcohol use, and others still on their bereavement. What that led me to do was actually to interpret each interview from those 3 discrete subject areas. What I ended up with was 63 interpretations, which is a lot of data. So I'm going to go on today and talk about sibling relationship and bereavement, drug-related death and how this impacts on the siblings' bereavement. And then, because my focus is on siblings and the sibling relationship can only really exist within the broader family context, I will discuss one family response to drug-related death that I've noticed in my research. What I'd like to do first is pause for a moment and think about the sibling relationship. Brenda Marshall is a prominent author on sibling bereavement. She says siblings know each other in ways that friends and other blood relatives do not. We have shared bedrooms, bathrooms, holidays, school days, family milestones, meals, and ways of growing up that people outside the family can never fully understand. The bond is intense, complicated, sometimes difficult, often wonderful, and absolutely irreplaceable. Sibling relationship is probably one of the longest relationships we will have. It's one of the 4 attachment relationships we form in our lifetimes. The others are with our parents, our children, and our partners. Developmentally, we often spend more time together with our siblings than any other family member. They're an important part of child and adolescent development and adjustment, providing innumerable opportunities for social learning, mediated by gender, birth order, closeness in age, time spent together, quality and perception of importance. I'm going to progress on now to stigma, but as I do so, please hold the significance of the sibling relationship in your mind. We know drug use is stigmatised, and I'm not going to talk about that, except to say that the individual's behaviour is contrary to the social norms. They're violating social rules. They're responsible for choosing an activity that risks their own life, and they're wanting to use drugs instead of participate in socially acceptable ways. Not all drugs are stigmatised in the same way. There is a stigma hierarchy attached to the type of drug used and the method of drug use. So smoking a bong is not as bad as intravenous heroin use. Through association, siblings, like their parents, can internalise the public stigma. Isabel says, there's no way I would have gone back to work and said my brother just died of a heroin overdose or heroin poisoning. I think perhaps I thought it would have reflected badly on me. As you can hear, siblings can feel judged, shamed, blamed for the drug use. Isabel introduces the notion of drug-related death as well, which takes me to the next part of my presentation. Drug-related death is interesting because when I began doing this research well over a decade ago, I could only find about 3 articles on drug-related death. Valentine's edited book, Families Bereaved by Alcohol and Drugs, published in 2018, was groundbreaking. Since then, there have been many publications, especially Dry Regrove's more recent work. Drug-related death is a stigmatised death in that the focus remains on the cause of death, not the person. The death is seen as self-inflicted. They've actively risked their own life by violating social rules, choosing instead to use drugs. Catherine talked about writing a blog about a brother's death and was contacted by numerous other siblings asking how she can talk about it. And she said, the person that died of an overdose was somebody. It makes me really aware that the person's life is sort of denigrated by virtue of how they died. It totally overlooks who they were. And Sally says, there's a silencing that goes on when the person is alive. You can't talk about it. You can't talk to your social network. And then when that person dies, not only can't you talk about how traumatic that was, but you still can't talk about the drug use. And if you can't talk, and then you can't celebrate the person's life either, because people will look onto that and say, well, what are you celebrating? Which is very sad. Siblings can feel judged, shamed, blamed for the drug-related death, and they can be silenced, as is the case for Sally. This leads me to disenfranchised grief. Doka introduced the concept of disenfranchised grief in 1989 to refer to losses that are unrecognised and unsupported by society. Stigmatised deaths, such as drug-related death, are disenfranchised deaths perceived as only occurring to families beset by problems and or judged as self-induced. The result is reduced access to social support because the family are not deemed worthy of support. Gina doesn't tell people that her brother died of a heroin overdose. As she says, because I know they will judge. People do not know how sort of sad you are. And she says that someone said to her, you know, you've got to realise your brother was just a junkie, so you'll get that. In response, Gina says, well, you didn't know him. You don't know what he was like. He wasn't just a junkie to us. And I think this last sentence speaks volumes. Drug-related sibling bereavement is not openly acknowledged or shared. A characteristic of drug-related death is these deaths are often sudden and unexpected. They can be traumatic. They're usually stigmatised, and therefore the bereavement is disenfranchised. And any of these factors can potentially lead to complicated grief. Coming back to Marshall's research on sibling bereavement is interesting here as well, because she identifies sibling bereavement as a disenfranchised grief, in that it's not really acknowledged socially. For example, think about how many bereavement cards you've seen for sibling loss. I've been actively looking for over a decade and I haven't seen one. And how many times have you heard or said to a child at a funeral, their sibling, be good for your parents or look after your parents? I know I have. So for siblings, their bereavement is disenfranchised, silenced in two ways because of the relationship and the drug-related nature of the death. Now, most families I know and have worked with are motivated by protecting their own. It's one of the functions of family, and more specifically of the parental subsystem. This is not to say that families do protectiveness well. Families also have rules around privacy, and they routinely hold shared secrets. I say this because protective responses are instigated to shield the family, and there is usually a secretive quality about their protective response. I have some examples from my research to share. Protecting the sibling's identity. When Helen responds to questions about how her brother died, she says, I have said things like, oh, it was an accident, and I just leave it there. When she explores this further, she says, I think it's protecting his memory and protecting myself. And then there is protecting the sibling relationship. So over time, Tony describes the process of finding another way to be with his brother. He says, at some point, I had to say, my brother makes poor decisions. And as much as I don't condone it, I can't condemn him for it. All you can do is offer support. Janet also talks about protecting relationships in the family. She talks about keeping her brother's confidence. She says it was about protecting my parents from being worried and protecting my brother by not betraying his trust. And allowing him to lead some kind of secret life. Others protected their family as a whole from poor judgments due to the stigma attached to drug use by not talking about their sibling, alive or dead. Connie says people don't understand how drugs can take hold of anybody. People probably go, I wonder what happened in their family to cause that. And I don't want people making that judgment of my family. Families as a whole also protected the sibling by continuing to include the sibling in family activities, helping the sibling maintain a sense of belonging and connectedness, and to maintain a different identity to that of the drug-using identity. Sometimes a family may respond to a specific situation. Crystal described her family as closing ranks around her brother when they discovered his drug use and suicidality the week before Christmas. She says the family were just being a strong family. We're here to support you. We're here to help you. And we sort of cut everyone else out. Close families can be very protective in terms of protecting a family member and all family reputation from the outside. So what goes on inside the family remains private. It can increase family solidarity, enhance the sense of belonging and security. So in summary, sibling relationships are significant and worthy of attention. Sibling bereavement and drug-related death are silenced socially, and there's an inability to talk outside the family and be supportive without judgment. And these experiences can sit alongside a strength in family relationships where inside knowledge belongs to and is held by the family, protecting the identity, relationships within the family and the family as a whole. Thank you. Here are some references. And here are my contact details. So thank you very much. Stop recording.